Next, we have a panel discussion titled Understanding Best Practices in Multicultural Marketing, moderated by Professor Stacy Schwartz, who I had the pleasure of sitting in my intro to marketing class some years ago.
All right, so it's my pleasure to welcome everyone to our first panel of the morning. And we have joining us today, first of all, I'll start with Michael since he's at the start of our lineup here. Michael Smith is the Chief Marketing Officer at the Lemon Perfect Company, where he oversees all marketing efforts for the brand. Prior to his current role, he spent 10 years at PepsiCo, where he was most recently the Senior Director of Marketing for PepsiCo's water portfolio, which includes Bubbly, Life Water, and Aquafina. His work there included a recent multicultural marketing campaign for Life Water called Life Unseen, which you may have seen, which showcases the creative work of diverse artists from fashion, film, music, and the visual arts. Artists whose work would otherwise go unrepresented because the artist is a person of color, has a physical disability, or is part of the LGBTQ community. Michael received his MBA from New York University and his, New York University's undergraduate degree from Yale. Of course, I put you guys on different pages, so to stay in order here. Sorry. Next we have Amber Chenevert. She is the Group Director of Strategy and Insights and the Cultural Studio Lead at VMLY&R New York, which is a global brand and customer experience agency. She challenges her clients to embrace fresh ways to engage customers through a marketplace diversity perspective. Her marketplace diversity perspective includes age, ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, and physical ability. It also includes and considers the history, systems, and structures that gives insights into how today's consumers navigate their market decisions. Her 18 years of business and academia work includes deep experience in global CPG and health technology. Something really special about having Amber join us today is that in earning her own PhD in advertising at University of Texas in consumer behavior and marketplace diversity, she studied with Dr. Jerome Williams. So we're very happy and proud to have you joining us today for this honor. So she also teaches undergrad, graduate, and executive courses at UT Texas, St. John's, and NYU. And then finally, back to my previous page, we have Reginald Osborne, who comes to us as a marketing consultant with the Van Osborne Group. And he consults with agencies and clients specifically on cultural insights to target multicultural customers. Previously, he managed the New York office of Walter Isaacson, where he led the Macy's account and the firm's Black and LGBTQ practice. He has worked in multicultural marketing leadership roles, specifically focused on Black and LGBTQ markets at a number of various large and boutique agencies, including TBWA Chiat/Day, Arnold Worldwide, and Spike DDB. He has worked on multicultural accounts such as Vonage, McDonald's, State Farm, and Jaguar. And he worked directly on the client side at Novartis and Nabisco. And Reginald joins us today with his MBA with a concentration in marketing from Clark Atlanta University. So with that, thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate your being here in a true hybrid fashion, remotely and in person. So just to start things off, it'd be great if you could pull up Reginald's slides, please. Because I'd like to start things off. We learned a lot about, the diverse audiences, and I want to take a step back and say, well, what the heck do we do with that as marketers? So what is multicultural marketing really about? What does it mean to us? What does it mean in careers? And Reginald, please take us through that background and definition.
Good morning and welcome, everyone.
I need the microphone for the people at home.
Okay. Good morning and welcome, everyone. And I'm thrilled to be here to talk about a subject that I'm very passionate about. So what is multicultural marketing? Well, really, it's a niche within marketing. It's really a focus of a brand to try to grow the brand by focusing on multicultural audiences. So rather we're talking Hispanic, African American, Asian American, or LGBTQ. And what that does is it really forces the brand to be very intentional about understanding the aspirations, the cultural nuances, and the cultural insights that really impact these consumers when it comes to purchasing goods or services. So it's really about really getting underneath and doing the research to understand what really makes their behavior unique to their culture that may impact the brand or category. Next slide, please. Now within, one slide back, thank you. Now within multicultural marketing, there are some subset terms. So for example, total market or general market, which has typically been described to talk about the marketing practice of reaching all consumers, where the thought is pretty much that most consumers are all homogeneous. Cross-cultural marketing is really the practice of focusing on what are those unique passion points that we all kind of share, whether it's fashion, music, or sports, and try to connect the brand around those passion points. And then the third is international marketing, which really focuses on marketing outside of the US, where you're taking in consideration a country's culture or their unique cultural trends and try to make the communications a lot more tailored to that particular market. And then one term that's not up there is target marketing, which is really when you specifically focus on a group, such as targeting the African-American community or either targeting the Hispanic community or the LGBT community. Next slide, please. And the importance of multicultural marketing, we started to hear some of that in the Nielsen presentation. As was shared earlier, the multicultural markets are really the emerging majority. And by 2040, I think we'll get away from this term minority because they will be the majority. And particularly when you look at this area, like the New York area or Los Angeles, we're already the majority. When you add up the Black, Asian, Hispanic, and LGBT community in major metropolis like New York and LA, they're already considered to be the majority. They are younger and more diverse. I think it's about 42% of the 75 million millennials are multicultural, and that will only grow with Gen Z. The buying power, as we stated earlier, over $4 trillion in buying power among these four segments. And then general market, which really, again, has been kind of a term used to be more of a homogenous approach that really does not take into consideration the unique cultural differences among these segments, is really a term that's kind of going away, I think. Because of the importance and the growth of the multicultural segments, we need to move more towards an inclusive approach in terms of marketing. And then the influence on culture, when you are plugged into what's going on to pop culture today, you can't deny the influence of the Black and Latino or LGBT community on culture. And so it's really important to understand those insights and how that really drives the conversation today with just about any category. And then last, the social justice movement, particularly with Black Lives Matter. I call it the wake of the George Floyd effect, in the sense that there's this tremendous push now for equality and inclusion, particularly when it comes to Black and African Americans, which has really kind of accelerated this focus on multicultural marketing. But in short order, you know, when you look at the numbers, in just about any category or any product, any brand that wants to continue to grow in the future, they need to really start to understand and take a look at how are we reaching these segments and making a difference.
Thank you. Amber, did you want to add anything to the conversation about the importance of these markets and the importance of recognizing this market?
Yes. We need to get used to this. I think one of the things that's really interesting is even the way clients today consider their broader target marketing. So when they consider, yes, we want to speak to women between 18 and 25. We can do research and collect data on women 18 to 25, but I also say that it's really important for clients to understand the subsegments that make up the whole. And to the extent that particular groups of women may use one product or service more than another, that we have to make sure that that particular group is segmented appropriately so that when we go and do marketplace research, we're properly representing the whole as well as the subsegments to gather insights.
So it sounds like this is not only reflection of demographics, but this is actually business. Like this is, if you're not speaking in numbers and not just in numbers, as we heard both from Nielsen and from you guys relevantly, you're not going to succeed in the market today based on what consumers are expecting. Michael, I'd love your thoughts on either adding to this list of important factors and also transitioning into whether businesses, brands are realizing this. So how many have woken up to this and are actually embracing it? Or are we still at a place where we've got a couple of good examples to share?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think Reginald hit the nail on the head as far as a description of multicultural marketing. I think that to take the second part of your question first, brands are evolving their thinking, but that's taking time. And it's also not a linear process. I think it's very much tied to the openness of the brand itself or the corporate entity that it is tied to. And I think that part of that is due to the fact that there is real friction and cost in moving and adjusting your business to take more advantage of multicultural marketing and a better understanding of many of the overarching societal and population trends that we've been talking about here. The one thing I do want to hit on that I think was so important on Reginald's last slide is that brands that are doing this right and brands that are really leaning into multicultural marketing are brands that understand the power of integrating themselves into culture and doing so in authentic and organic ways. And so I think that's where there is so much opportunity. If you understand where the culture as a whole is going, who is shaping and moving cultural trends and finding the right ways to integrate your brands where they have an authentic reason to play, that is when brands are doing multicultural marketing really, really well. And I think that progressive marketing leaders are driving their brands to think more culture in versus think brand out. And historically, brands have been built to think brand out. What do I want to say? Where do I want to say it? And I want to do it on my terms. And I'm going to push advertising messages at an audience that frankly has no choice but to sit and listen to said message. We don't live in that world anymore. And so brands that start to think truly culture in around how they actually build campaigns and drive messaging are ones that are doing this really well. Brands that are still stuck thinking brand out around how they want to push messaging are ones that are probably a little behind the curve.
Want to respond to that?
Oh, I think if you want to further elaborate on that, I think it's really about how do you engage in the culture, because with the transition in media, I think what Michael was underscoring is that we are no longer kind of held hostage to watching network TV. And I look at myself, I cut the cable cord probably 5 years ago. And, I get to choose what I want to watch, how I want to watch it, when I want to watch it. And I think there's also an attitudinal shift where younger generations are at adverse on top of being able to opt into applications where you can choose not to have advertising. So what that means is that if you want to talk to me, then you've got to find out a meaningful way to not only talk to me, but have me engaged. So I think when you start to look at some of the advertising by some brands like Procter & Gamble, they don't really do advertising anymore. So it's not, hey, buy some laundry detergent or buy some, cleaner for the floor. It's really more content advertising that's talking about social issues, so that they feel like they can be a part of the conversation. So they've done some wonderful, I think, best in class advertising for Black, LGBTQ, and also Hispanic, that really talks about some of the issues that these consumers are facing, but it's brought to you by Procter & Gamble. Everybody knows you can buy Tide and all these other household products, but it makes it much more meaningful of a connection. And I think that's what brands are trying to find an opportunity to do, as Michael said. How do I connect with you based on your values? And the only way to know that is that you really have to understand who I am.
So that's a good segue to talk about the how. So if an organization, if a brand realizes that this is something that's important for them to do, and here's the myriad list of reasons why, they want to start to do it. Does this dovetail with DEI efforts? Are these two things simultaneous, or are these two things separate? Amber, do you want to?
They are simultaneous, because ultimately, and my perspective is, I work for an advertising agency. It's a B2B service, essentially. And so we are here to help to support the growth of our clients' businesses. And so we first have to, just in any case, we have to understand what the business challenge is. We have to understand what segment or segments of the population are going to help us solve for that business challenge. And then we have to understand what matters to them in culture, in order to even before we even write a brief, before we even design the research, we have to understand those things. But it does work hand in hand, because we do have to solve business challenges first. And there are very strategic and thoughtful ways that we can do that by keeping the customer first. And then going back to the other point, but still staying in this point, we're also having to keep in mind that consumers can have direct conversations with brands in ways that they couldn't have 20 years ago. And so that changes the calculus about how you go into the marketplace as well, like how much more you have to know and be engaged in what matters to them, because you can hear back within 30 seconds. Yeah. And it will potentially be a bomb around the world if you don't do it correctly. So there is lots of investment in really getting it right in the upfront, and really thinking through how we have these conversations with diverse audiences, because it saves us a lot of money, realistically, because we're more poignant and more specific about who we're reaching. It can also save a lot of embarrassment for the brand, but more importantly, it can help endear the consumer to the brand, because we're doing all of that work in the upfront. So in our case, it works hand in hand.
Yeah, I want, it's something that I'm really, I think, aggressive about, and that is understanding that diversity and inclusion in multicultural marketing, they are codependent upon each other. And I think this is probably where companies are really beginning to realize that. I think that it will probably eventually be an emerging practice, from the standpoint that you can't really have successful multicultural marketing until you have an organization that truly embraces diversity and inclusion. Because if I'm not in the room, if Michael's not in the room, if Amber's not in the room, oftentimes you have people who don't really understand. And it's not because we are people of color, it's because we have a skill set and we have the research and we are practitioners of multicultural marketing. And so if we're not included in the conversation at the beginning or sitting at the table, then oftentimes it's difficult to exercise multicultural as a practice. And so therefore, you've got to have both of them. And sometimes people confuse the two, and they say, oh, we have a chief diversity officer. Well, that person is a chief diversity officer who's charged with trying to bring diversity in the culture, but multicultural marketing is then a separate practice within the organization. But you have to have both, I think, which companies are realizing to be successful at it.
Yeah, I would actually love to add to that quickly,
Please.
because I think what Amber and Reginald are both talking about is corporate culture overarchingly. Because oftentimes within an organization, your DEI and your marketing organizations are separate parts of the org. But you need leadership that's willing to fundamentally shift your corporate culture to think more inclusively. And when you do that, you should be impacting the organization overall. So that's going to include your DEI efforts, but it's also going to change the way you think about the marketing practice, from the way you define your consumer, from the way you build your campaigns and your creative, from the ways that you test that creative, from the voices that you have in the room as you're concepting ideas. All of this is about corporate culture shift broadly that then filters down across every function in your organization, which is why these two things are tied together. If you want multicultural marketing to fail within your organization, segment it separate from everything else that you do. That is the easiest way to ensure that it never actually fully integrates and changes the way you think about your business, your brand, and your consumer. And I think that's why these two things need to be so tied at the hip, because they represent an overall shift in corporate culture.
So that actually leads me to think about a little off script here, but where this fits into our organizations. And when we think about, working at a brand, does every brand need a multicultural marketing strategy? Or if a brand appeals to a mass market, does mass marketing work anymore? Do we need to segment mass market products to speak relevantly to each one and then add them together to be a comprehensive strategy?
So it's a little bit how I discussed it earlier. One of the things that we're really pushing for in the agency from a strategy and insights perspective is to be very, very deliberate and descriptive about not just the mass audience, but what makes up the mass audience. And not only that, once you understand that, ensure that your data collection is a reflection of that. Where we've stumbled in the past is that our sampling has not been a proper reflection of the actual target who's actually buying, the actual behavior. It's super important to ensure that that is done, because those insights drive the entire process. And if we're not collecting data from the right audiences in the right amount based on the sample of the people who are actually buying, then we could miss the mark. So a quick example is if we say that we want to go into the marketplace and we want to do mass market research, and we partner with a market research vendor to help us to do that. If we just say, oh, well, we'll just do standard pop or general pop, that might mean that we have 12% African Americans, but our actual market segment might be 30 or 40%. So we can fall short if we don't have the proper representation in our sampling, and then that means that we don't get the right insights, and then our creative briefs are not where they need to be, and then we're scrambling at production trying to figure out how we make something more diverse. And so what we're pushing for is really being very deliberate about our market research and sampling. So anybody who's interested in a future in multicultural marketing or in marketing in general, please get your research skills together because we need you. Okay. That's all.
I believe it's this continual push, and Michael kind of hit on it. You got to shift the paradigm, right? When you say mass no longer means white or homogeneous. Mass means there's a diverse audience that we have to reach. And marketing one-on-one is how do we connect with people on a one-on-one level? And this is even more important in a splintered media environment where people get to opt in to whether they want to receive your message. So I think the other way to look at it is that brands often have a lot of data, and they know segment-wise who's driving the brand. So for example, there are certain categories. If you look at beauty, Black women are driving the beauty category. Look at the success of Fenty Cosmetics. Rihanna is now the second Black billionaire due to the fact that she was smart and strategically created, I think, over 32 shades, because Black women women of color have long struggled to find products that really complement their skin tones, right? Hair, Black women are driving the hair category. So there's certain categories, because of the lack of deficiency in product, in the lack of not being reflected in media, where they will drive the category, and these brands already know that. So you don't have to convince them too much. It's more like some of the other brands where they may be trying to catch up to understand the importance of how these consumers really influence, and in a lot of cases are driving the conversation. It's like, when I think Honey Maid, like years ago, broke ground when they redefined what family meant. Like Honey Maid is a 100-year-old brand, right? So nobody's really talking about graham crackers, but the fact that they put a gay couple in the advertising, and I think they showed a single parent family, it really thrust them into the conversation, because there was a lot of people who didn't like the fact that they showed an LGBT couple. But you had now Honey Maid as a part of reinventing the brand to say, now we're relevant because we have redefined what family means for America, which has changed today.
Do we want brands to define what family means to America? What's the role of a brand, do you think, in taking a stance on some of these issues and having an opinion?
I think it. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Michael, do you want to start?
I'll hop on that real quick. I will say, since the beginning of branding and advertising, brands have been reflecting culture. So at the end of the day, I think brands have always, in their pursuit to resonate with consumers, reflected back some type of cultural idea or paradigm to reinforce the type of self-identity that they believe their consumer has, the role the brand plays in it in order to drive trial, loyalty, whatever overarching objective a brand is trying to reach. So I think brands have always been reflecting culture. I think that we live in a time where because consumers can communicate back to brands, and because consumers' voices can be heard at a scale that probably is unique to any other time in history, brands have been forced to lean into types of cultural conversation that maybe they haven't been as open to previously. I think it presents a risk and an opportunity for brands that do it well and are smart and thoughtful around who their consumer is and the way they want their brand perceived and positioned. Leaning into cultural conversation can do a ton to help reinforce the self-identity of their consumer, to identify the role the brand plays, and to build more loyalty amongst that consumer base. That also means that there's risk. And if brands do it wrong and aren't effective at communicating or truly don't understand who their consumer is, there's an opportunity for them to reflect an idea back to their consumer, or to consumers more broadly, that doesn't resonate. We don't live in a world anymore where the monoculture allows brands to just communicate broadly and to do so with limited risk. Now, we're picking more sides, and brands to some degree are going to reflect that culture back. And so that requires more nuance and focus in your message and an understanding of who your consumer is and what you want your brand to stand for. But that said, brands have always reflected culture. I just think there's probably slightly more division and slightly more of a requirement from consumers to know truly where brands stand.
Thank you. Sure.
Okay, so I want to go back to an earlier point that both Michael and Reginald made about, when we're thinking about how we go forth in the marketplace and what we reflect, how important it is that the business first understands what that means for them. And what that means for the brand. So, for example, to Reginald's point, at VMLY&R, we did start Inclusion Experience, which is founded out of a combination of several practices we already had going in the agency. But one is business transformation, which looks at how you can be more inclusive in your organization and changing systems and practices to do that. It's also then the next stage of it is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is about employee experience. And then we apply our marketplace chops once you figured all of that out. So when it comes to the marketplace and saying, well, what do we want to reflect? You also have to be a reflection of, and a way to minimize risk is being a reflection of who you are as an organization as well. So, and this is a simple example, but if you are a company who says that you're all about pets, it's very important that your employees have pet insurance. So these sorts of things are through and through in the organization. And the more you can shore that up in the organization, the less risk you take when you go in the marketplace and decide who you want to be. Now, there are some brands that, have a very specific way that they want to express family and what that means, but that's also reflective of their company values and their mission. And we may not necessarily agree with that, but to the other extent, that's how hardcore some of these other companies need to be about the realities of what they need to do to fix their own organizations in consideration of how they want to reflect that in the marketplace.
So that's really good segue, because I want to talk next about how students find jobs at companies that truly are either doing multicultural marketing well or have the ability to do it well if they bring themselves to the company in an appropriate way. So what kind of jobs exist? Do they all have to have the words multicultural marketing in them, in the job titles? How do you find jobs like this and identify companies that are ready?
I would say, first and foremost, when you're young, coming out of school, you're probably still in the exploration phase. And I'd say, think about what your passions are. What do you want to do? So my route was I started on the brand side. After working in advertising sales for a number of years, I went and got an MBA because I thought that would put me in a position to be more of a marketing expert. So I went to Nabisco Foods Group and started as a associate product manager. Well, what I learned was I was much more excited about the advertising piece of it. And we had an agency called McCann, which was a large general market agency at the time. And I made a decision to pivot and go to the agency world and followed my passion for advertising. And then at some point, I got an opportunity to work for this shop that I'd never heard of called Spike DDB, which was an ad agency created by Spike Lee, and got introduced to the world of multicultural marketing. So what excited me about that was, one, I had always loved Black culture, but had not known about the practice of how to infuse that into marketing. And so it was a great opportunity because it was a boutique agency to kind of learn from the ground up from someone who was highly regarded as a filmmaker who understood and represented positive portrayals of African Americans in his film, but to then take that and figure out how to develop a practice around it and teach brands how to market to the African American market. So my path was really more of a personal exploration. What I would say to young people today is first find out what your skill set and your interests are. One way to multicultural marketing is through the advertising industry in the sense of the ad agencies. The multicultural agencies are an opportunity. You've got Black agencies, you've got Hispanic agencies, and then you've got agencies that do a little bit of both. On the client side, there are some big brands like McDonald's, Procter & Gamble, who have dedicated multicultural marketing efforts. However, sometimes those shift, and it's a little tricky because sometimes they're a few years they're strong in multicultural, and then sometimes they change and they're not. So there may not necessarily be a role such as multicultural marketing director, because oftentimes those positions come and go and they don't really have a large staff. But I think that as long as you're committed to this practice, because of the importance of this of the audience, you will have a skill set that will probably grow, because companies will probably figure out a way to get better at it, and they need people who really understand this marketplace and have the skill set.
Great, thank you. Did either of you want to add anything else to that question?
Oh, sure. I think when it comes to looking for roles, I think I'll go back to my earlier point. I think it's really important that students investigate companies from a mission and values perspective, to see what sort of work they're actually doing as an organization that is a reflection of your values and things that you might want to be a part of. Do you see them serving their community? Do you see them, out front on issues that you think are important? Because that's really going to be a reflection of your experience in the organization. And it also might be a reflection of the opportunities that you might have to even be able to add to a marketing practice, to expand multicultural, to see, where they're headed. But you really need to make sure that you're going to work somewhere that's aligned with your values, and then is also very interested in training and developing new talent, because not every organization is really interested in training new people. They actually kind of poach people from some other organizations that are known for that and do that. So I think that that's really important.
Thank you. Michael, coming from the brand side, is there something you would advise students as far as making your mark on a brand that might not be thinking multicultural to begin with?
Yeah, great question. So in regard to moving into the industry, if you're interested in marketing, get a marketing job and learn whether you like it or not. You're so young in your careers. Everything you do is going to give you more information. It's going to help you identify what you really enjoy and the skill sets that you want to deploy. It's going to help you identify things you don't enjoy and do not want to do. And all of that information helps you narrow and focus your career over time. So broadly, I would say get into the industry, start doing the work, and learn what you enjoy and don't enjoy. In regard to working on brands, and I love that Reginald went through some of his career and background. I've simultaneously worked on campaigns for LifeWater that Stacy talked about, that were all about underrepresented creative voices from a multitude of different communities. I was also working on a campaign for Bubbly that was really about the fight for LGBTQ+ parenting rights. And I've worked on campaigns for Gatorade that were about the authentic role of Gatorade in football and making your way to the Super Bowl that have nothing to do with any multicultural audience. And I've done oftentimes all of that simultaneously. And so when you're working in a brand, you're not everything that you do necessarily when you're working on an individual brand is going to be focused purely on a multicultural audience. What I will say is what's important when trying to be an agent of change within an organization is starting with what matters to the company and what matters to the brand. And I think Amber hit on it with first and foremost understanding the mission and values of a company, but within a specific role on a brand, because frankly, even myself today, Amber and Reginald today, and everyone in this audience isn't going to walk in a room and just dictate everything that is going to happen. So you have to understand, first and foremost, what drives the company and what drives the brand. So aligning it with your mission and values is great, but then secondarily, with an individual brand, who is the current consumer? Who is the target consumer you're going after? How is the brand positioned within the marketplace? And then how can tighter focus on multicultural marketing or specific segments of the marketplace help you achieve those brand goals, help you differentiate the brand within the marketplace, help you resonate more with your core consumer. Because when you start with who the consumer is and how the brand is positioned and differentiated in the marketplace, so you understand how you want to show up, what you want to communicate, start with that lens. And then look at how leaning into multicultural audiences in a way that feels authentic because of who the brand is, who it's designed for, what it promises to its consumer, that allows you to speak in the language of what's going to matter to brand directors, chief marketing officers, because they're always going to start with who the consumer is, how the brand is positioned, and what we're trying to promise to our consumer. When you put multicultural marketing through that lens to articulate how it can help grow those marketing objectives and build the brand in a differentiated fashion, then you can be successful. When it's multicultural marketing for the sake of multicultural marketing, without the business background, without an understanding of how it fits into the overarching brand agenda and who the brand is, then it falls flat. When it's filtered through how the brand is designed and who it's in service to, then it becomes a much more applicable way to think about driving brand growth.
Yeah, it's way more than my daughter's applying to colleges now, and we're getting lots of mail, and lots of them have the same exact stock photo of the multicultural group of students sitting around a book. So listening to all of this and reflecting back on our title about best practices, it sounds to me, just to bring it all together, like best practices in multicultural marketing is not about the creative execution at the end that people check boxes and say, we've got a diverse talent pool in our ads, right? It's really starting off with the composition of the company itself, the values and mission that you guys have mentioned, the culture of actually what the company recognizes it's trying to authentically achieve, the processes that the company has. So to Amber's earlier point, if someone's going to quickly respond to social media, they have to do so in a culturally relevant way, not always the most popular way, but the way that reflects the value of the brand, right? And what the customer is expecting from the brand. And the research is underlying all of this to make sure that we are speaking to the right people who actually want to engage with our brand. And if you're turning people away who aren't really important to your brand, that's okay too, right? And then finally, the execution comes last. So just a quick fire before we sign off. I'd love to get each of your examples of a good campaign that you know may have started from good research and good background that these folks can look up later on their own and sort of investigate to try to find companies like.
One campaign that recently launched that I was pretty impressed with was one for Sephora, where they had content specifically highlighting the beauty of Black women. Why I like this campaign is that Sephora, I think, kind of struggled with having some relevance for Black women. But again, you know, it's smart from the standpoint, it's a category where we know they've been underserved in terms of product, but also representation. Particularly when you think about Black women, there's been a lack of representation of darker skinned Black women. What is great about not only the campaign is they have also committed to, I think it's the 15% pledge, where there's this movement for retailers to stock at least 15% of their shelf space, dedicate at least 15% of their shelf space to minority-owned brands or Black-owned brands or brown-owned brands. And so in this case, not only is a brand like Fenty products carried at Sephora now, but a brand like Ebony Fashion Fair, which really had started years ago and was ahead of the curve in terms of creating products for Black women. And then they also have an example of where they're giving back in terms of contributing to HBCUs. So you see that's a full, well-rounded example of how they're committed to the community, not just in representation and having just ads, but they understand some of the insights as they're putting in the communications itself, but then they're making a commitment as a company to help Black-owned businesses.
And just to sort of add on to that point, similarly, because I'm a strategy and insights person, I'm starting with the research and the insight. And in particular, one insight is, in fact, between 40 and 45% of Black women are seeking beauty and skincare products that are Black owned first. And so if you're a business like Target, what that means is that you can do good and you can make money by putting in efforts to fast track Black-owned brands into your store. So we partnered with them on their Target Accelerator program to even do some marketing education for these Black business owners to be ready to excel in that particular environment, but also to be set up for other opportunities for funding, et cetera. But that whole story goes into the marketplace. And so not only are those brands present, but consumers have an opportunity to see the experience of those business owners in their relationship with Target and how that's helping them grow their business. But again, it goes back to what Michael and Reginald said. It has to start with the insight. That insight that their target audience was actually looking for Black-owned brands. That means that, it makes a lot of business sense for you to execute against that. And the last one that I will say because we're on the Fenty train, and I have on some Fenty right now. But the Savage Savage Times Fenty lingerie launch is something else that I think is a great one for students to look into for similar reasons of the Fenty launch, which was the broader range of affordable lingerie for women and now men of all sizes. Particularly women understand that bras can be very expensive, good bras, but just the sizes and what's available. And then even the representation in her runway show in particular. If you have Amazon Prime, you should check it out. But those are my two right now.
Multicultural marketing is more than the promotion. It's the 4 Ps, right? It's the product and the place and the price. Go ahead, Michael.
I obviously
Use your brand. Use your brand.
Of course. No, I have to show some love to my former LifeWater team and the Life Unseen campaign. We think that was a powerful piece of work. It started with understanding who our consumer was in relation to the premium water category. It was a younger, more multicultural consumer that cared about self-expression as a key aspect of their day-to-day. We then went to the brand's core positioning, which was around inspiring creativity. You see artwork on the water bottles. So again, it's something that the brand had been focused on for years. And then we saw a real issue in the marketplace around creative work from multicultural communities not being seen, not being heard. And so that's what the brand tried to tackle with the Life Unseen campaign, contracted 20 new pieces of creative work, all from underrepresented artists, partnered with Issa Rae to make sure that that work was visible, created a fund to ensure that the next generation of underrepresented artists were also going to have an opportunity to have their work made and shown, all tied to what we thought was a real societal issue that mattered, but came from an organic place from the brand. So it wasn't, a brand with no role or relevance to this space coming in and trying to brute force a message. It was a brand that had been there trying to do something that it felt was going to be impactful for society as a whole. It drove great business growth for LifeWater. But again, that to me is a great example of starting with who your consumer is, how the brand is positioned in the marketplace, finding an issue that feels organic and relevant to that brand, where you can have a point of view, and then truly building a campaign that can have impact.
Thank you. Powerful last statement. Oh, I'm going to get yelled at. Go ahead.
Just because I think this is important. One great example, because I talked earlier about the importance of how these cultures can influence culture and put you a part of the conversation, is the campaign that Tiffany's currently has where they're featuring Jay-Z and Beyonce. What makes this campaign remarkable is it's a part of their whole new push to rebrand. I think it's over a 100-year-old brand that's been very kind of stodgy and conservative, but to rebrand how they envision love. So since they've been married as a high-profile couple, they featured them in their campaign, and I think she was the first Black woman to wear the Tiffany diamond. And so what that says is that it's not a campaign that's a multicultural campaign, but they smartly chose two people who are moving culture forward to help them refresh the brand. And then that's another way to kind of look at, again, how you use multicultural consumers to kind of like help the brand to connect and be relevant.
Thank you. Those are all 4 great examples, and again, really permeate across how insights impact all 4 Ps. And I really appreciate your time and insights, Michael, Amber, and Reginald. And with that, thank you all for joining us this morning.
Thank you, guys.